their work and make work around that.
Yeah, and you look at the whole legacy. I mean, Sally Mann was completely influenced by Emmett Cowan, and onwards. And there is a legacy of artists photographing family. And part of family is, if they have children, are their children. And unfortunately, we live in a misogynist culture in which that you often, if you're a woman, become a bad mother.
Exactly.
And that's what happened with Sally Mann, unfortunately. But when you look at that work and you realize she's doing it with an 8x10 camera, and you go through it and you know what it takes to make images like that, she left a profound legacy. And the unfortunate thing about it is I like myself thought the same things along the same lines as Janna, is like, oh, like where is crossing the line? And it's such a shame, because I don't really think that Sally Mann ever crossed the line. But now we have to ask ourselves those questions and talk about those questions, and the notion of the bad mother, because of the reaction to her work.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. Paul, do you have any thoughts on this?
I am not a parent, but I'm thinking about the moments, well, the way in which photography, I think, always complicates, will always produces another thing that exists within a relationship that has to be contended with. So, in making work with friends, that is kind of necessarily being open to an unplanned response, letting the work and letting the subject speak back and having to incorporate that. And at times where that has failed, when I attempted to use photography as a way to answer questions about an unstable or an unresolved friendship or romantic relationship, and it making the images led the house of cards to collapse, only to be rebuilt later when the photographs could be set aside and then we could return to them. And so since then, it's been quite a long time since I've attempted to use photographs in the middle of a relationship that way. My photographs, when there's interaction, have tended to be taking aspects of a friendship that exists outside of the studio and using the studio as a place to, in a sense, play act and for the sake of creating an image. But yeah, that's my contribution to that.
Thank you, Paul. Didn't want to isolate you from this. Not specific, but I felt like there's a way to get you in. So here's another. Actually, this is a very specific question for Kathy.
Yeah, I see that question.
See that one?
What do I think about deaccessioning artwork, basically, is what you're talking about, right? To diversify collections?
Oh, sorry. There was a different question, but
okay. I thought.
I'm looking at the Q&A, so I don't think.
Okay, give me the Q&A.
I'll do the Q&A and then we'll jump back to that one.
I don't want to talk about deaccessioning.
So this one, Kathy, this is how have you approached or experienced intimacy in the houses that you have photographed that were not your own domestic space? Elizabeth Taylor's house or the Goldstein house. And I think also Janna can touch on this too. So, but let's start with you, Kathy.
Yeah, no, I mean, Elizabeth Taylor was, how do you take somebody as iconic as Elizabeth Taylor and actually begin to create a more humanistic image of her through her belongings? When I started the body of work, I had no idea that she would pass away in the middle of the body of work. And then that proved to be an extra issue, because you then don't want to do it out of a place of nostalgia. You then have to still edit for your original ideas in terms of the body of work. And it's really hard when somebody passes away, that it doesn't automatically become like trying to capture the last moments before the dismantling of the house, which I did. I stayed around and I continued to do that, but that's not the work that the place where I edited from. I still wanted to make it a portrait. And I think that it's a complex portrait, and that's what I like about it, is that it takes, all of those images to make a different kind of portrait of Elizabeth Taylor, and one that might be more intimate than if she had come to the studio and sat for me. And I appreciate those ideas of intimacy. And I've never not thought of place and architecture as bodies in different ways. I've always thought of them kind of merged together in relationship to the complexity of identity, and that we also aren't a singular identity necessarily as human beings. And so trying to make the bodies of work begin to move through those ways where I don't know if a portrait of mine, like the portrait of David Hockney, yeah, that's a portrait of David Hockney, but is it the essential portrait of David Hockney? I don't really believe in portraiture in that way. I believe in it's a shared moment, and it was a shared moment. It's always a shared moment, whether it be an architectural moment or an actual person sitting for me. That it is, to be corny, it's that thing that photography does, that you get to capture that moment. And it's something that's kind of amazing, and obviously I've spent my life being obsessed with it.
Good response. We like obsession. Janna, I mean, you definitely have entered into people's homes a lot recently.
Yes.
What's that like?
Well, when I was in grad school, Kathy, I remember you telling me my studio one day that you were photographing Elizabeth Taylor's house. And that was so fascinating to me. I was photographing my husband's grandfather's house at the same time. So I had this idea of this work that you were doing in the back of my mind as I was doing this other work. And then when I began the Paul Williams work, I still hadn't seen the Elizabeth Taylor work, but it was still the idea that you were doing it was in the back of my mind. And then I finally saw it, and it was totally different from what I was doing and totally different from how I imagined it. And it's so exciting to see just how different people approach making work that is similar on paper, that should be more related, or you would think would be more related, but is actually a totally different thing and is interpreted completely differently by different people. So
Yeah.
your work has that body of work influenced me before I saw it. So
That's funny. I forgot that I was doing that when you were a student. It's so hard to remember all the different years. But yeah, I think that was like a rare thing that I shared that too, because I was on a non-disclosure. I wasn't even allowed to talk about it. So
all right,
all good now.
I won't say what year it was.
But Paul, I mean, there are obviously space. You're in the studio. You're perhaps creating your space, or at least the visible space we see is constructed. But there is still architecture to it. So maybe there's a perspective that you'd like to talk about.
Yeah. I never thought I'd be a studio photographer. Like,
look at your face. It's scrunching up.
But I think if I hadn't been making work in domestic spaces for, 14 years prior, I don't think I would have gained an understanding that's allowed for work to remain to feel safe and intimate. Like, I had taken for granted for so many years making work in New York that the friends, that the people, the social world that I was photographing, I was making the photographs in the same place where we would like hang out and have beers and like listen to music like the night before. That I always knew I didn't want to use like a daylight studio. So many photographers like, oh my God, I got getting access to Smashbox Studios and like do this setup and make pictures. And I was more I think I intuitively knew that I wanted a place where we could all be comfortable, because you don't see the conversation that's happening in the pictures, but there's always a conversation happening. And the photographs are often made, I find the best ones are like at the end, or sometimes maybe one at the beginning will surprise you, but it's often at the end. And it's something that only happened that I from a type of intimacy that was like already existing. And I didn't realize how much I'd taken that for granted until I came to LA. And I remember how difficult I don't know. I think Kathy, I don't know if I ever showed you the very first portraits I took in Warner. They were awful.
I don't know if I saw those. I mean, we were looking at the zines and you were working with the archive. And I
Mhm.
was saying, okay, we got to move out of the archive a little bit now. You know, archives are great, but it's like you could spend your life in your archive and it's time
Yeah,
to like see what you can do beyond that.
yeah. But I think what the reason why I was showing you that is because I had not successfully figured out how to take a portrait in a studio.
Yeah.
So eventually I started making photographs in the studios and homes of friends in LA. And that was my way of kind of coming back around. Um, and so I think um, there's, uh, yeah, homes, spaces, I think they can all, when it's done successfully, when it's done with kind of care and attention, um, they can all hold like a space for intimacy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. We do have another intimacy related question here. Do you think we lost gain and intimacy when we transitioned to the immediacy of digital photography? Is it easier now to capture intimate moments?
Mm.
Mhm.
I think it's how you define intimate,
Mm.
you know. I think that that's every artist's kind of own position with how they use images or what kind of imagery they make. I mean, I can take a portrait in the studio that feels utterly intimate up against a colored background. But I can take another portrait in the home that can fail that kind of intimacy. So I think intimacy is something that's really kind of curious to try to wrap our heads around, because I don't think that it necessarily can be defined that it's a certain sensibility or a certain feeling. I think it ends up being more on an emotional scale. Um, yeah. Like I can look at certain things and that aren't even pictures of people and feel an incredible intimacy. Like I think about Via Selman's work. That is freaking intimate. And you know, and part of that is knowing the hours that is spent with that piece that makes it intimate.
Actually, that just makes me think that, or reminds me that Janna just spoke about some Vera Luter photographs uh,
Mm,
from the LACMA show. And I think, those are long, just her practice of like long, long exposures, right? But yeah, I don't know, Janna, do you have some thoughts about that, since we've been talking about your camera roll for a year or so now?
I think my phone in particular as a digital camera makes easier to capture our candid, intimate moments. I can take a picture of something that's happening, or a moment of really beautiful intimacy really quickly. But then when I take out a more formal camera, I think I can also get that intimacy, but then it's both performed because it's for the camera and I'm saying, okay, we have to do this, but it's also coming from a genuine place. So it's still real intimacy. And I don't think I'd rate one over the other. No.
And you, Paul, do you want to go?
I love that you mentioned candid, because I've been trying to like tumbling this question over in my head and wasn't able to figure out what I was having a little trouble with it. But I think Yeah, the digital camera is less the divide than the cell phone versus the camera. That means there's a camera that you can't ignore.
Mhm.
Um, I got really interested in cell phone cameras, and it was like a big part of this last show I did because I had these outtakes of friends taking like selfies in my studio that were always like this
Mm.
weird behind, everyone always has one. And it's funny because I think of like the work that's made in the studio because we have a slowed down like focus and intention, and I'm very much thinking about intimacy. But the types of pictures that get snapped, the candids, feel like the complete opposite of intimacy, even though they're made in the same space. And I think part of it's because they end up going onto like Instagram stories or whatever type of a thing. And so the my thinking around the inclusion of those images in in this show, I think was a part of this question of speed as related to intimacy, the speed of dissemination, because all of the images shot into the mirror are like an enclosed kind of space. The making and the viewing is like happening at the same time. But I'm also really slow to show things now. Like I often don't show things for like a year or two after they're made. So I became interested in this as the cell phones in them because those snapshots, those candid things, if you look closely at the physical work, they would reveal, because the cell phone has an unusually wide angle of focus, it would reveal the whole setup, the thing that I never show. So I guess that's kind of intimate, but the things produced on them have already gone out into the world instantaneously. And so they're kind of the exit from this like enclosed loop that I had kind of like made. So I think they offer a promise of intimacy, but they end up just doing something different. And I still don't know how to resolve these things. It's questions that I have.
Does it bug you that people post your studio on Instagram? Like that is like in a weird way more intimate because it's like, pulling back the curtain, so to speak, of the process. And we all know that us artists are controlling human beings, you
Yeah.
know?
So when I have studio visits, I do not let studio visit people. I do not let curators or like any official studio visit to ever post a picture of my studio. But I actually like when friends do it because I figure if let's say in some of the images with the cell phones in my show, like if Jacob or Victor or Jerome, and you happen to be privy to that type of thing that kind of appears and disappears, then that's great because it provides another way of navigating through the work,
Mhm.
and it kind of positions the the later viewer in relation to a type of like social, it positions people with a type of like social proximity or distance that I find intriguing. So I'm like, it's great to go out there because they're friends, but if I had like a big name dream curator visit, I still would be like, no, you can't post it behind the scenes because that's as a whole different audience.
Yeah, it does have a different audience. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's also the institution, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
represent an institution, so it's that institution then has this access that,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a much bigger whole, perhaps, you know.
Yeah.
Well, that's been fascinating to hear your perspective on that, Paul. We also have one more question. Oh, actually, we've got a couple more questions. So bear with us, guys. I knew we'd have some good.
No, we're good.
Okay, good. Okay, do any of you encounter challenges or concerns when discussing the intimacy presented in your work? Are those conversations you have with the people you include during that process?
Hmm.
I think it comes up for me in photographing other people's homes and in making sure I'm being respectful of the spaces and not revealing more about them than they would be happy with. When it's here at my home or with my family, I feel like I have more control over the situation and I haven't had any issues, but I'm always trying to make sure that I'm not that when I'm in someone else's space, that it's not too intimate, I guess. Intimate without being too intimate.
I think that anybody, even before I was an exhibiting artist, when I was photographing my friends, they understood that I was an artist making work. And I would say that the only times that maybe there were different moments where, but it was still like an artist making work. Like a good friend of mine and I snuck into the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco in the 80s, and she took her clothes off and, you know, in the hotel room, and she's lounging on the couch, and it's in Girlfriends. And that friend said, "Oh, I didn't even know that that was an actual picture in your body of work." And because I had gone into the archive and dug things out later in the 2000s, and it was a image I had made in like 1983. And she was fine with that, but I was worried. Like I was worried, oh, did I cross the line with a friend? Because you know, I always was the person with a camera. There was never not a time in my life all through high school. I was always, oh, there's that girl that takes all those pictures, you know? And so I've always been really aware of the respect that is needed. And I have a really hard time with photographers that cross that line for myself. There's an enormous amount of portraits in the world that I feel are hurtful. And I'm more of a humanist, and I believe in incredible consensuality. You know, one of the great things that you learn about growing up in the San Francisco leather community is all about consensuality. So I had those lessons early on, and I'm grateful for it. But I would say that for the most part, everybody who has sat for me knows that I'm making art. And every once in a while, people are like, "Oh God, I really don't like that picture of myself." And I'm like, "Yeah, what do you want me to do?" And they're like, "Well, just go ahead." So, but it's tough. It's a tough one. I mean, it really, I really believe that that, you know, respect is first and foremost in making work.
I
Oh, yeah.
totally agree. It's um, thinking about the way in which the response to the image changes over time is also really interesting. So yeah, like you said, Kathy, when I'm making the images, people know now that there's a context, that this art, this is where it's going to go. I, I do my best to always remember to send the contact sheets to my friends when I'm making the photos, because I'm really curious to know what their favorite ones are, and
Oh,
then
wow, you're brave. I don't do that.
also give them a chance to like say no to any. It very rarely has anyone ever said no, that there was one that they didn't like. But I have two close friends who some years ago decided to withdraw their images from the world. And I had made portraits of them a few times over the years prior to that. And I still have those photos. I have those prints archived, but you know, at the time I took them off my website, I made sure they never circulated and they won't be shown. And I'm fine with that. And then one thing that's different between now when making work, when you know every friend knows it's like, here's my CV, you know where the work goes. I'm not going to put it on a billboard, I'm not selling it to Shutterstock, but we understand it's going to be in a gallery. But the early portraits, I feel like when I was making, you know, we maybe thought they'd be in zines, but there was no understanding. We were really naive and didn't think that they would be in museums or places. So when I did this like survey show at Cam St. Louis, that was the first time some of the older portraits from like 2005 and such were ever shown. So I did go back and just ask them if they were comfortable. Everyone said yes, But an interesting thing has been sometimes people have said that they're uncomfortable with the images, not because of the picture itself, but because it because there were things that were happening in their lives that I wasn't aware of. I was curious on the surface through making these portraits, but for them, it brings up sometimes painful moments. And so it's been really interesting to think about what was possible, what was visible, what I thought I was capturing versus what the work was for the subject. It's so no one has ever said no, but they've been really, I think, helpful conversations to have. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. We have some great just general comments. Everyone is really enjoying the conversation. And so I'm just going to throw out if anyone has a last final question, otherwise we'll wrap up. And if either of you have a burning question for one of the others, or if Janna has something she wants to throw out there, this would also be a cool time to do that.
I guess I would like to say thank you to Kathy and Paul. I've known Kathy for 10 years, since she called me on Valentine's Day in
Oh yeah, I cold call them.
yeah. We were going into a restaurant, my husband and I get a call, and it's Kathy Opie. And we're going to this reservation, and she, telling me that I have an interview for UCLA. And Paul, I've known you since I moved to New York to go to NYU when I was 18, which is half of my life now. And I just respect both of your bodies of work so much. And I'm so honored that you spent some time with me this evening. So thank you. And thank you, as always, Freddie, for doing such a wonderful job organizing everything and thinking everything through.
Well, you're awesome. And I'm really happy for you. So it's fantastic. Your book is so beautiful. I'm so happy to have it. So
Amazing.
look forward to more. It was so funny. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, oh yeah, because I said, oh, I'm going to do this conversation. And it was actually Phil Mercado, who was part of that whole group that I had of people supporting photography, the photography department at UCLA. And he totally recalled your exhibition, like completely. So it's, yeah, I love that when that happens.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. I wish we could all see each other in person
soon.
Exactly. Well, we can host you all in Ojai. We'll have a gathering. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you again, Janna, for being, our impetus and inspiration and spark and catalyst for gathering in these interesting artists around the campfire tonight. And thank you, Kathy, for plugging Janna's book. It is a gorgeous, incredibly special book. And
should I hold it up?
There you go. Thank you. Take a photo of that, Janna.
I need you to sign it. I need a signed copy.
That's a good reason to.
Yeah, that's the reason to get together. I need the book signed.
So. Exactly. So we do have some copies. Yeah, we do have some copies on our website at theohaiinstitute.org. So feel free to get yours today. And again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you so much to our panelists. And again, I'll leave the chat on for a little bit. There's some really lovely sentiments coming through. I think you should all be able to see that. But people are very grateful. So, well, thank you. It's been a wonderful evening, and look forward to welcoming you all to Ojai one day soon.
Terry Zucker wants her book signed too. You're gonna have to do it. I think you're gonna have to, like, when you get to go to Ojai to see your show finally, I think maybe there should be a little book signing too, huh?
Exactly. Yeah.
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 We'll put you in the window so people can watch you through the window. COVID safety,
Too intimate in a window. She's like, I'm not going to be window dressing.
No, definitely not. No. But thank you all so much, and we'll look forward to continue our conversations. Grateful for all your time.
Great.
All right, thank you. Time to go
Bye,
drink.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.